demand for white supremacy in this country is far higher than the supply. Groups like the Southern Poverty Law Center are financing the very extremist groups that they then report on. You remember how there were denials about whether or not Ray Epps was a Fed? What if those denials are true and actually he was working for the Southern Poverty Law Center? Want to stop the funding of white supremacist hate groups? Stop funding the Democrats. The Southern Poverty Law Center, which has worked in official capacity with law enforcement agencies and intel agencies, and is sort of the premier cultural institution that everybody just relies on as a default for hate groups. They've long since been a joke, and in fact, we've covered them before on this show. Terrible things they've done. People like Dinesh D'Souza, Charlie Kirk.
They're literally putting high school chapters of ours on a hate group next to the KKK. They cannot have dialogue. They cannot actually go onto the merits of why they are right or why we might be wrong. Instead, they must smear us.
Turning Point USA that they've put on their hate watch group. Of course, then when violence is directed towards those people, like Charlie Kirk, who was assassinated, they just sit around. I remember doing a show once where we were covering how there's all these examples of left-wing violence, and one of the people at the Southern Poverty Law Center was like, well, we don't really want to focus on left-wing violence. So they bill themselves as this down-the-middle, totally nonpartisan, just trying to root out extremism. When in reality, all they're doing is being interested in calling right-wing groups extremist so that culturally, politically, and legally, you could attack those right-wing groups. And it works. Even normies just accepted a lot of what the Southern Poverty Law Center said. And if you go back and you focus on a group that's been deemed radical, extreme, etc., you could bet your ass that somewhere in that chain, Southern Poverty Law Center was there publicly calling that group extremist, whether it be the Proud Boys, whether it be Patriot Front, whether it be Unite the Right, the Charlottesville Rally, etc. There they were. There was the Southern Poverty Law Center. And even more egregiously, they were sometimes directly used by government and law enforcement when it turned out on how Congress people were citing extremist groups in the halls of Congress on record, or law enforcement investigating groups that they deemed extremist, all blatantly partisan, blatantly non-neutral. The whole charade is always that these groups that have this veneer of they're the official source, whether it be some academic group, some media group, some law enforcement or Biden agency, or a group like the Southern Poverty Law Center. And then when you debate dumb people like the aforementioned Brian Shapiro, what you said is that's what they're able to do is point to these things and have this fallacy of like expertise. Well, they're the experts. This is what they tell us. Now, if you ever had any questions about this, COVID should have put that far from your mind when thousands of experts were telling us COVID was so severe that we couldn't leave our homes to do simple things like go to church, send our kids to school. But they said you could go march for Black Lives Matter because you know what was worse than COVID? Racism. But don't worry, because magically, this is the first virus in history that has political preferences. Somehow it knew not to spread at the Black Lives Matter rally. Amazing. The instances are too many to count of what we were told to blindly trust because it was science, only to later find out that it was a blatant lie or it was just made up bullshit. Like 6 feet distancing? How'd you come up with that?
Where you confess that you made up the COVID rules.
I said that it is not based in science and it just appeared.
That was their explanation afterwards. I don't know. But you were censored online for fucking disagreeing. Remember Dr. Fauci said, to disagree with me is to disagree with science.
They're really criticizing science because I represent science.
So but we have to trust the experts. Should have went right out the fucking window there. And make no mistake, it's not just the medical or pharmaceutical community. Same's true with foreign policy. Same's true with domestic issues. So much of what we rely on are studies that come from universities that are overwhelmingly radically left-wing. So you'll be told over and over things like this. Well, the medical industry agrees that giving these hormone blockers to children is reversible and it's a good thing. And surgery and removing people's anatomy, even when they're underage, makes people less likely to self-harm. All of it bullshit, easily, just by looking, be like, wait, what? For example, you can see that almost everyone that started on hormone blockers never transitioned back to their sex assigned at birth, but almost everyone that was given the blockers magically persisted through to a lifetime of pain, of mental anguish. They didn't give a fuck. They were making money. Over and over, I debated this subject, but the science says, this study says, painstakingly, I would go through the study. Not just me, thousands of people. These studies are bullshit. Look, just now, we're starting to get to that point We have another story maybe I'll cover today. We covered on the extravaganza. Just now, you're starting to see normie media people, left-wing media people in the UK go, maybe we did let in too many people from places like Afghanistan that we don't know anything about. Maybe we did. Of course, fuck to even say that. You could get locked up in the United Kingdom, but trust the experts. Here in the United States, we're told by everyone from Libertarian Think Tank to Cato Institute to damn near every left-wing academic institution in the country that not only are illegals not a problem, they're better than regular Americans. They commit less crime. They're more productive. They're fantastic. No downside. So as small border towns, basically primarily made up of Hispanic people, we're suffocating. We can't take these numbers of illegals that are coming across. As they were being called racist, ironically, Hispanic people being called racist by ivory tower white people. Eventually, someone finally smartened up and said, fuck it. Then let's send these illegals to the white neighborhoods, the liberal sanctuary cities like Martha's Vineyard. How'd that go?
Martha's Vineyard Shelter Coordinator Lisa Belcastro says the island is not capable of housing the 50 illegal immigrants flown there by Florida Governor Ron DeSantis.
At some point in time, they have to move from here to somewhere else, right? We don't have the services.
For some reason, these well-educated people in Martha's Vineyard, one of the richest fucking people in the country, they didn't want the illegals. They shipped them out in fucking 2 days. And that was only 50. Imagine hundreds of thousands. How could that be? All of the experts told us they're a great boon. Doesn't Martha's Vineyard read the experts? And yet still we persist. Ah, the experts say, the experts say, the experts say. Ah, the court said Trump's a felon. That's all that matters. So you're saying whatever the courts say, go. If they've ever called someone a felon, then they're guilty of that crime, no matter what. Yeah. Oh, cool. Let's go back to like all the black American cases that you paid. Well, that was different, but that's the game. Now, luckily, more and more people are waking up. But the game overwhelmingly has been, ignore the evidence that you can see right in front of your face. It's all bullshit because some professor says something. Ignore that all through 2020, the entire summer, you could turn on your TV on damn near any night and see a violent Black Lives Matter protest. Yet, Cato Institute and the Center for Strategic Intelligence Studies and all these groups said, actually, it's right-wing violence. And boy, oh boy, did they love citing the Southern Poverty Law Center, didn't they? I talked about it today. You remember the Covington Catholic kids? This was the story where you had these Catholic kids that were going to the March for Life, and supposedly they surrounded this Native American, Nathan Phillips, the keeper of the sacred pipe. Nathan Phillips. And the real story was, Nathan Phillips saw some adults who happened to be black yelling at these kids who happened to be mostly white, but not all. Calling them racial slurs, calling them homophobic slurs.
Your president is a homosexual.
And Nathan Phillips sees these adults fighting with these kids, shouting all these slurs, and decides he's going to intervene on the behalf of the adults. And of course, those adults, it was the first time I really heard of this group, was the Black Hebrew Israelites. Of course, they were connected to all sorts of crimes, including murders, beheadings out of Florida, shit like that. Meanwhile, we're told that we still have to fear the boogeyman of the KKK. Oh, they're everywhere. These Klansmen, where? When I was like 11 or 12, we used to go, I mentioned this the other day, we'd go see my grandpa and grandma in the nursing home every Wednesday, Saturday, and Sunday. So we lived in this one small town, and it was like 20 minutes away, this other small town where the nursing home was. So we're going through one day, and there's just basically one main street in this little town, and traffic's way backed up, like something's going on. And as we get closer, at the courthouse, there's 6 KKK members. One of them's got a bullhorn, and he's like, talking, and then they're handing out flyers to people that want them. And across the street is probably 70 people yelling at them. Fuck you! Everybody white, by the way. Probably, I'd be surprised if there's a black person in the whole town. So this wasn't like blacks yelling at the KKK. This is white people yelling at the Klan. And the Klan guys, I remember I was like 11 or 12, it's like, oh, like even then, I knew what they were. Violent heathens that were going to show up to hang people that were a different color, or people that sympathized or didn't like them. That's what they were. And you heard these guys talking. By the way, I'm not saying they're a good thing, but when you heard them talking, it was like, we want political representation. We think it's okay for white people to stick together. Now, maybe they have more nefarious shit going on behind the scenes. I'm not here to say that. But the part that really stuck out with me was in this little white town, in today's parlance, the Klan was getting ratioed to shit. Fuck you, everyone. But I'm told that this is the group, man. Woo! Watch yourself, man. This group, they're running shit. What are you talking about? Now, what we've come to learn is something that people have said many times, myself included, that the demand for white supremacy in this country is far higher than the supply. The establishment, and particularly the left and the Democrats that represent them, they really, really, really need that boogeyman. They need it. They don't really have policies that are defensible anymore. So they need that boogeyman. But see, here's the thing. That's not enough anymore. Guys and bed sheets aren't enough. What if you could make it so your opposition, every one of their supporters are guys in bed sheets? That's the real angle, isn't it? What if you could treat an entire political movement as that? And all you got to do is get enough normies on board and then shit'll fly. So that's where we were. That's the story of how we enter in to the story of yesterday, which is the indictment of the Southern Poverty Law Center.
A grand jury returned an 11-count indictment charging the Southern Poverty Law Center with 6 counts of wire fraud, 4 counts of bank fraud, and 1 count of conspiracy to commit money laundering.
But it's amazing of what's going on. First thing to know is the case hinges around the idea of wire fraud, and anyone telling you that it's an open and shut case one way or the other is full of shit. We'll have to see more evidence as it gets presented. I believe, I follow a lot of people. One of the theories that I agree with is they didn't name specifics that they're indicting. They named the organization. My guess is that the next step will be bringing in specific people from the Southern Poverty Law Center and sort of seeing who's willing to cooperate and who's not. That'd be my guess. They had enough that a grand jury thought that an indictment was warranted, and we'll see where they go from here. The first thing I have to say is this to anyone on the left that's bitching about this. The bar for starting an investigation is very low. No one's above the law. As far as I'm concerned, any impropriety that there's any amount of evidence for any of these left-wing groups should result in a law enforcement investigation, and any crime whatsoever that they commit should be charged. Every fucking time. I don't want to make up evidence. I don't want to investigate people corruptly for no reason. But I heard the Democrats in unison tell me over and over and over for 8 fucking years now. No one's above the law. The bar for starting an investigation's very low. So every time they wanted to investigate Trump or anyone connected to Trump, they were like, hey, prosecutorial discretion. Hey, no one's above the law. Hey, the bar for starting an investigation's very low. Okie dokie. Now, it's been to my great chagrin that the Trump administration hasn't reciprocated in kind. And even still, just going after the Southern Poverty Law Center is only scratching the tip of the iceberg. I don't know how many times I've said it on this show. Does Trump not understand? They're going to bury him and his entire family. They're not even being secretive about it. We just got John Eastman disbarred out in California, Trump's former attorney. So make no mistake, they're playing for keeps. I'm not suggesting doing anything illegal. I'm saying operate within the full extent within the confines of the law. And I've been told over and over, nothing wrong with that. No problem whatsoever. The bar for starting investigations is very low, and no one's above the law, so no one, if there's any allegation of untowardness, investigate. If there's any proof that that was criminal, charge every time. So any Democrat that's out there right now saying, this is weaponization, my response to you from the bottom of my heart is, go fuck yourself. I hope that it's visited 100-fold upon you. May you and the people that cheered for the lawfare face those consequences yourself. Because until that happens, it will never end. That's where we're at. Because the left felt that they were so morally superior to their opponents that everything was on the table, up to and including assassinations of people like Charlie Kirk. I'm not suggesting personal violence. What I'm suggesting is utilize the tools within the confines of the law to the fullest extent to make those that broke the law feel the pain that they sought to exert on others. The selective application and the two-tier justice system has gone on for too long with no one pushing back. The argument of, oh, but if we just sit back and don't use the legal system like that, it'll all be corrected, is bullshit. These people will not stop until they face the consequences they sought to enforce upon other people. I'm celebrating today. Cheers. Cheers to everyone. It might be a small victory, but great. I hope the Southern Poverty Law Center and all their donos are sleeping very uncomfortably this evening. Cheers. Will this result in actual conviction shit? I don't know. Probably not. Until I actually see them, I'll continue to say probably not. My understanding is they're bringing these cases outside of D.C., which is smart. But But let's talk a little about what this means. I mentioned at the outset of the show, there are these seminal moments from the Democrat perspective of shit, these key moments leading into the Trump second term that are the building blocks for the entire case that they have to justify mass censorship of conservatives online, authoritarian policies under things like COVID, policies like keeping Trump off the ballot, cheering for him getting kicked off of places like Twitter, all of this shit. It's all justified because of these stories, these seminal moments. The first was Russiagate itself. Now, I've talked about Russiagate an awful lot. We're going to talk about it more in the coming weeks. Hopefully, I'm still not holding my breath, but the truth will come out. I talked about it enough. Let's see if anyone in my audience remembers. What is the inciting, we were told the official story, what is the inciting moment for the opening of Crossfire Hurricane? When the FBI decided to open Crossfire Hurricane, it was based on a man named George Papadopoulos. Papadopoulos was this low-level dude that was in the Trump campaign. You have to understand this. Trump is running on training the swamp. Did a very poor job of it. Understand this. One of the things that you can at least give him somewhat of an excuse of is everyone that's qualified on paper for the jobs that you need to fill, and Trump even talked about this on Joe Rogan's show before the 2024 election. He was shocked at how many people he had to appoint.
What did you expect, though, in terms of, like, once you got inside, you had to appoint all these people? Yeah. Like, how many appointments did you have to make?
Well, you have actually 10,000 appointments.
Same is true of running a campaign. There's a lot of people. But if you're running on draining the swamp, no one from the swamp is realistically going to be fit for your administration. So you end up with like a bunch of relative unknowns. And George Papadopoulos is one of those guys. We're told Crossfire Hurricane started because Papadopoulos talked to an Australian diplomat by the name of Alexander Downer. And allegedly Papadopoulos got drunk and said, "Let me tell you something, Alex. The Russians have emails about Hillary Clinton." Incidentally, I've looked further into this. He didn't even mention emails, I don't think. He's just said, like, I think the Russians might have dirt, is basically what he said. Then once the infamous DNC hack occurs, the FBI says, it must be that Trump's campaign guy had foreknowledge of Russia hacking the DNC. So the inciting incidents are George Papadopoulos and the hack of the DNC. And what we'll find is both are bullshit. The most likely explanation for the hack of the DNC was an internal leak, probably by Seth Rich.
The death of a DNC staffer is stirring up national controversy as conflicting reports continue to pour in. Seth Rich was murdered last July, and so far police have made no arrests in the case and have no leads on a suspect.
But the story that we're told on that makes no sense. Let's go through it real quick. The FBI, as per policy, asked for the DNC server and was declined. They were not allowed to get the DNC server. Instead, they received a copy of the server made by CrowdStrike, who was a firm that the DNC had paid. The FBI then took that copy and came to the conclusion that because these Russians basically left their digital signature, that it was clearly Russians that did this hack. That's what we're told. They never demanded to see the server. The DNC didn't demand to give over the real server. Of course, we found that CrowdStrike made similar claims about other hacks. We're told they were wrong, like in the government of Ukraine. But nonetheless, forget that for a second. The story of George Papadopoulos is even more ridiculous. I'll make it quick. The gist of it is this. George Papadopoulos met this guy that, according to the FBI, is the central Russian spy figure, a Maltese professor by the name of Joseph Misfit. Now, Joseph Misfit worked at several colleges that had connections to Western intelligence, including UK intelligence, the CIA, and Italian intelligence. His friends later would testify they all assumed that he was working for Western intelligence. No one ever thought that he could possibly be working for Russian intelligence. But allegedly, Joseph Misfit was this Russian spy who got in contact with with George Papadopoulos, and put him in contact with another Russian, this Russian telling Papadopoulos, hey, we have some emails about Hillary Clinton. Papadopoulos goes back to the Trump campaign. Trump campaign's like, yeah, don't do that. No, not interested. There, that's it. That's your big story. Now, of course, Joseph Misfit, who was the central Russian spy, not my words, this is the FBI and Bob Mueller's claims. For some reason, even though the FBI said they had him completely nailed, that he lied to the FBI, a crime which they saw fit to charge a decorated military veteran like General Flynn with, for some reason, they chose to not charge this Russian spy. But Rob, that's because he's Russian and they couldn't have brought him. And yet they charged 17 Russians in the Internet Research Agency, who they also knew would never be extradited. So why not charge the central Russian spy that lied to you? No explanation. When Jim Jordan asked Bob Mueller this, Bob Mueller drooled on himself and then said he wasn't going to discuss prosecutorial decisions.
Director, the FBI interviewed Joseph Mifsud on February 10th, 2017. In that interview, Mr. Mifsud lied. You point this out on page 193, volume 1. Mifsud denied. Mifsud also falsely stated. In addition, Mifsud omitted. 3 times he lied to the FBI, yet you didn't charge him with the crime.
Excuse me, did you say one? I'm sorry, did you say 193?
Volume 1, 193. He lied 3 times. You pointed out in the report. Why didn't you charge him with the crime?
I can't get into internal deliberations with regard who would or would not be.
Charge a lot of other people for making false statements.
Because the truth is, what we're going to find out if the truth ever comes out is Joseph Mifsud was working for UK intelligence. He was working for Western intelligence. And that actually what had happened was that the West, whether it be the UK on its own or most likely with the help of the Obama administration's intel agencies, planted a story, told Papadopoulos about the story, and then later said the fact they told Papadopoulos about the story justified the entire investigation into Trump. A setup from the beginning. In equivalent, they planted the drugs on him and said, look, there's drugs, and justified that for the investigation. That's what we're likely to find. The next event was Charlottesville, we'll talk about here in a moment in great length. The next event was the Ukrainian impeachment. Remember, the Ukrainian impeachment started almost immediately as Russiagate fell through. Now we're finding out all sorts of problems. There are charges being filed against Eric Charmella, the whistleblower that we weren't allowed to hear about. Turns out that he was duplicitous and lying on these forms, and the inspector general that allowed it, who changed the forms and changed the language, and that this was a political hit from the get-go. One of the things that the establishment is amazing at doing is weaponizing their weakness against their opponents. So we know for a fact that Hillary Clinton's team knew that her connections to Russia would be a weakness. Uranium One scandal that her department signed off on mere weeks after her own husband, Bill Clinton, personally met with Vladimir Putin himself, only to be paid $500,000 by a Russian state-owned bank. Wow, that's a weakness for us. You know what we should do? Accuse Trump of working with Russians. Bam. How did they do it? Well, they worked with a one-time suspected Russian spy named Igor Dushenko to filter the information to the Obama FBI that was more than happy to jump on board and illegally spy on the Trump team. All the while, we were told, for 4 fucking years, we were told you are ridiculous conspiracy theorists for believing it. It's absolute bullshit every step of the way. Until eventually, once it turned out everything we said was accurate, they just shrugged their shoulders and go, oh well, it's a long time ago. Next, the Ukrainian impeachment was them weaponizing that Joe Biden issued a quid pro quo of $1 billion American tax dollars in the form of a guaranteed loan to Ukrainian government if they fired the prosecutor that was investigating his son's company.
If the prosecutor's not fired, you're not getting the money. Oh, son of a bitch. Got fired. And they put in place someone who was solid.
The quid pro quo worked, fired the prosecutor, brought in a new prosecutor that Biden liked, who immediately dropped the charges against the company, allowing, not my words again, but the Obama administration's words, the Russian oligarch Zlochevsky back into the country of Ukraine. Came back laughing his ass off because his connections, which by the way, him and his team was constantly pressuring Hunter Biden, who was on the board of directors, and Devin Archer, his assistant, or his buddy, to lobby back home to get the charges against them dropped. Paid off nicely. And for a mere $74,000 a month or whatever it was. See, though, they had to impeach Trump for inquiring about it. Take your weakness, we were corrupt when it came to Ukraine, and then make it your strength. It's actually Trump that's corrupt for wanting to look into it. By the way, it's the same thing they'll do here. It's not that the Southern Poverty Law Center is corrupt, it's that Trump's corrupt for looking into it. Always the same story. They act with corruption. When the other side says, okay, we're going to look into this, they say, that's corrupt. So if Trump's team's looking into Letitia James or Fani Willis, that's corrupt. See how it works? January 6th, pipe bomber story, bullshit. For some reason, none of them cared about the pipe bomber. Easily the most serious event that occurred in the day of January 6th. They can't figure that out. The next event that they talked about in January 6th, the gallows. Have no clue who built the gallows. They went after everyone with an iron fist that did anything so much as set a foot on the Capitol perimeter. And yet people like Ray Epps that were intentionally telling people for 2 nights to break into the Capitol, mum's the word.
Go into the Capitol! Into the Capitol!
Incidentally, you remember how there were denials about whether or not Ray Epps was a Fed? What if those denials are true and actually he was working for the Southern Poverty Law Center and the FBI knew it, which is why he was given a sweetheart deal? Think it's possible? So they'd say, well, we told you over and over he wasn't a Fed. Technically true. He was just getting paid by the Southern Poverty Law Center that was cooperating with the feds. We were told there were no feds in the crowd. Later turned out that wasn't true. There were plenty of feds in the crowd. We had Capitol Chief's son eviscerate the official narrative. The guy that was responsible for protecting the Capitol talked about wanting the National Guard the day before and the day of, was denied repeatedly. Basically said after he put two and two together, he realized he was being directly denied by Nancy Pelosi.
When I went to ask for the National Guard on Sunday, January 3rd, it was her, Sergeant-at-Arms, Paul Irving, that denied the initial request, citing a concern for optics.
But there's still far more to come out about January 6th. These moments, Russiagate, Charlottesville, Ukraine impeachment, January 6th, these laid the groundwork for the entire criminalization of not just Trump and his team, but also the cultural momentum to bash Trump and his supporters as criminal, rotten, etc., etc. And one by one, they fall apart. Now, the defense of the Southern Poverty Law Center here is going to be, oh, they were just paying informants. That's all. They were paying informants. The specific charges has to do with the way they were being paid, which is tantamount to wire fraud. Again, we'll see. But they'll say, no. It's not that they're financing white supremacy, extremism, etc. It's that they're paying people within that to expose it. That's going to be the first line of defense. The next line of defense is going to be, who gives a shit about Charlottesville? So let's talk about that for a minute. Just like with Russiagate, where I debated people for years, and they fought tooth and nail and said I was a ridiculous conspiracy theorist, only to later be forced to say things like, yes, it was regrettable, or Destiny, it was a long time ago. Of course you're right. Of course the investigation started corrupt. I've always said that. The fact that I just got you to admit that our FBI was corrupt and engaged in a two-tier system, that's been my fucking claim since 2017. And you're conceding it all right now.
That was literally my claim at the start of the debate. The debate is that the FBI probably did heavily engage in a form of influence in our election season.
That's the take. Whatever. No big deal. It was a long time ago. I don't really remember the details. Anyways, who's living in the past? Says the people that incessantly focus on January 6th to this day. That'll be the same with Charlottesville. So what? Long time ago. Who gives a shit? Over and done with now. The truth is, Charlottesville was important for many reasons. God rest his soul, Scott Adams talked about how this might have been the most consequential hoax in the history of the country. They basically convinced half the country that Donald Trump literally said Nazis were good people. I can't think of a more radicalizing message. What would you do truly if you thought that the leader of the United States was a Nazi? By the way, the same people that made that claim on the left are now claiming that Donald Trump is controlled by Netanyahu and he's a Jewish supremacist, but just 4 years ago, they were telling you he's a Nazi. So they convinced half the country that Trump said Nazis were good people. And this was repeated over and over and over again by mainstream media sources. This hoax was tantamount to literally weaponizing half the country to think that Donald Trump was a Nazi. Now, I talked about, at the time, I was on a blog called Above Top Secret. And on Above Top Secret, I was talking to this guy. I told this story the other day. I'll be quick about it. He was a socialist or a communist or something. His name was True Brit. He went by the name True Brit. And basically, he said that after Charlottesville, any person who continued to support Donald Trump was, in fact, a Nazi. And that if they were going to win the next election, then we should genocide them all. Literally his argument. We don't kill you at first. And I talk about this a lot. To them, you are evil. You are. If you're a Trump supporter, you're evil. If you're Trump, you're evil. And they're not going to outright kill you. Charlie Kirk wasn't killed for being an extremist. Charlie Kirk was killed for being effective.
When you're effective, you're a threat.
Remember the other day we were talking about Destiny's mod that was telling Destiny, hey, your community here is having school shooter vibes?
Yeah, so yesterday I think Destiny referred to it as like kind of school shooter vibes going on as far as how people...
I told you, if you went back and you looked at the Reddit around the time that the Trump assassination, their rhetoric, which was repeating Destiny's rhetoric, was, hey, we tried to win at the ballot box. We tried to win with the courts. That didn't work. Okay, there's an answer for that. Then we'll use violence. That's how they feel. So escalating stages of force. Okay, if we can't beat you here at the bottom level, then we'll demand you get censored. And if we can't do that, well, then we'll dox you. And if that doesn't work, well, then we'll threaten you and use violence. And if that doesn't work, well, then there's an answer for that too. And that, there were thousands of people, if not hundreds of thousands or millions, that were like, oh my God, Trump is an open Nazi. His supporters are Nazis because of Charlottesville. Charlottesville also allowed the lumping in of the term alt-right, and to attack anyone that you disagreed with that was a Trump supporter is alt-right, and to silence them and get them banned, etc., etc. It also led to mass amounts of money being put into groups like the Southern Poverty Law Center and other groups. And then, of course, perhaps most consequential of all, Joe Biden claimed that the reason he decided to run for president in the 2020 election was he heard Trump say Nazis were fine people.
And that's when we heard the words of the President of the United States that stunned the world and shocked the conscience of this nation. He said there were, quote, some very fine people on both sides. Very fine people on both sides?
A lie. Now, back when this happened, I was covering Charlottesville. I went thread after thread. I did all this research, gathering as much video evidence as I could about Charlottesville. It was astonishing to watch the videos and now hear people who were there talk about what happened. Unfortunately, that website, Above Top Secret, is now defunct, so it's hard for me to get my thread that I wrote there. And even beyond that, many of the videos that were up on YouTube from there got removed, so you can't even see. But these were videos of people that were on the ground filming, like from their phones or their GoPros, etc. Here's basically what happened. The second day of the Unite the Right rally, Unite the Right people were there, and some of them have like ball bats or weapons of some sort. And the Antifa people in that group shows up, and they have like shields and bats and weapons. And the police have a line in between them. And basically, the police started ushering out the Unite the Right people straight into the Antifa people. So instead of keeping the line and being like, okay, you people go this way and you people go this way, they were like, we're going to make them go together. And you probably don't remember, but obviously, Heather Heyer, the woman who was ran over, that became the big story. But there were also a lot of video that was coming out in the weeks after Charlottesville showing, look at this, Unite the Right people beating someone. But then over and over, I would watch, and almost every time what you saw was the Unite the Right people would be far outnumbered in getting the shit beat out of them. And the police just sat there and let it happen. Then, of course, with Heather Heyer, you had people surrounding a car. Dude panics, hits the gas, runs over someone. Of course, open and shot, because he's an alt-righter. These were neo-Nazis. But they intentionally set up a violent confrontation, even the police. There were even people on the ground from like the ACLU and shit that were like, this is atrocious. What are the police doing? Why would they want that? Now we know. From the indictment, F-37 was a member of the online leadership chat group that planned the 2017 Unite the Right event in Charlottesville, Virginia, and attended the event at the direction of the SPLC. F-37 made racist postings under the supervision of the Southern Poverty Law Center and helped coordinate transportation to the event for several attendees. Between 2015 and 2023, Southern Poverty Law Center secretly paid F-37 more than $270,000. When you hear the left say, well, they just paid some informants. By the way, it's just one story. They just paid some informants. No. It's not like they gave a couple $1,000 to someone and say, tell us what you knew. Or can you go there and tell us what's happening? They paid the leaders, at least one leader in this case, who not only was responsible in the chat groups for organizing, apparently, part of the organization, but also for transportation. And they didn't pay them a couple $1,000. They paid them $250,000. Now, again, I'll talk to my attorney friend Ryan Mullally, and we're going to get into the specifics of the wire fraud that's alleged. But remember, one of the crimes being alleged here is wire fraud. The way in which they sent and concealed the money was fraudulent itself. We shall see. But I want you to think about this for a second. If the defense to this action is going to be no wrongdoing in there, no problem there. They were just spending their money in order to infiltrate this group and destroy the group from the inside. At what point does it go from you're sending a couple of bucks to get some information from inside a group to you're paying the leadership that then commits crimes? When do you become responsible for that? Now think about this for a second. Does anyone remember the case? We've talked about it several times on this show. Pam Geller having a Draw Muhammad contest somewhere in Texas many moons ago. And what happened, and this is in court records, we could see it. What happens is the FBI radicalized this Muslim guy to be like, you should stop that shit. You should stop it. So he did by opening fire. Court documents said that there was an FBI agent behind the radical Muslim shooter when he started shooting. The FBI agent fled. He left. Local police had to take the guy down. Now, this was an instance of what Ron Paul used to talk about a lot. That like 1/3 of the terrorist incidents that the FBI has claimed to have stopped were actually terrorist incidents that they themselves created. They'll find some autistic Muslim guy and convince the dude by showing him titty pics to fucking go out and go in some scheme only to arrest him before it occurs. Now, this is shady enough when it's the FBI doing it. Now we have independent groups doing this. And what happens if it goes wrong? So what if the Southern Poverty Law Center pays some white nationalist, hey man, here's fucking $50,000 a year, man. Get us some shit, dig us some dirt. And that white supremacist guy goes, great, I'm gonna take this $50,000, I'm gonna give it to my gang, and we're gonna go buy some meth. And then they go to buy the meth, and there's a shootout. Now the Southern Poverty Law Center just gave $50,000 to what they're calling a terrorist group, a gang, who then used it in the commission of violent acts. Do we just say, oh well, Southern Poverty Law Center was trying to do the right thing? Oh well, they intentionally funded terrorism. How can we think that that's something that you could just be like, what can you do? So, of course, at Charlottesville, you had on night 1, the dudes show up with tiki torches, right? Night 2, which incidentally, complete aside, but remember, we were told that, okay, they were saying hateful shit and whatever. Great, fine, grand. Fuck, you should hear what the average lefty says on a college campus. But okay, sure. But they didn't commit any violence, and we were told, but they surrounded people, and that in itself was an act of violence. Really? Care to watch any fucking anti-ICE protest? How's Savannah Hernandez doing as she was surrounded? It's funny how that works, right? When the left wants to surround you, when they want to chase Riley Gaines and surround her at a college campus, no problem. They said the same about the keeper of the sacred pipe. Nathan Phillips, keeper of the sacred pipe. Oh my goodness. These menacing kids surrounded this noble native man. That's harassment and intimidation. Yet the left does it all the time. But you had that tiki torch incident, and then fast forward. On October 29th, 2021, in Charlottesville, Virginia, a group of 5 people, 4 men and a woman, were dressed in khaki pants, white shirts, baseball caps, and sunglasses, showed up holding lit tiki torches in front of the Republican gubernatorial candidate Glenn Youngkin's campaign. Damn, nailed it. They chanted things like, we're all in for Glenn, and posed for photos, deliberately mimicking the Unite the Right rally in Charlottesville. Images went viral. Staffers and supporters of Terry McAuliffe, the Democrat, immediately shared the photos, portraying the group as actual white supremacists, supporting Youngkin and trying to tie him to racism and 2017 Charlottesville. Many media outlets reported it as a genuine demonstration of white nationalists. However, later that same day, the Lincoln Project admitted they orchestrated and paid for the stunt. The group was hired by a Democratic operative working for the Lincoln Project, Lauren Windsor. The goal was to create a visual link between Youngkin and the 2017 Unite the Right rally. One of the participants, a black man, which made the white supremacist optics even more absurd once it was revealed. And maybe you remember these pictures. Remember this? Intentionally looking like the Unite the Right. Make no mistake, Charlottesville was a seminal moment for the left. Now this was laughable. Again, the black man being included there, sort of a telltale sign. And yet, we without question just accept so many of these race narratives, extremist groups, etc. Sure, that one was a lie, but anyways, don't you dare question the rest. How about the story of Roger Moore? Roy Moore. Roger Moore's James Bond. Democrat groups literally used the playbook they accused Russians of using to help Trump in the 2016 election, except they actually did it, to paint Roy Moore as this monster. Then, of course, we had the famous, remember the January 6th, where the dude showed up with the khaki, and where we had the January 6th anniversary rally. And those dudes showed up. They're all like these fit feds wearing the same khaki shorts with sunglasses. It's a fucking joke. This was the event. These are the seminal events that are set up to put these building blocks. Now we find out what's going on is groups like the Southern Poverty Law Center are financing the very extremist groups that they then report on. But why? Well, because their allies, the Democrat, which they've worked hand in hand with law enforcement of them, it helps them immensely to be able to target and smear their political opponents, both legally and culturally. But it's also immensely profitable. Southern Poverty Law Center's revenue on October 2016, before Charlottesville, $51 million and change. After Charlottesville, a gain of $81 million. This led to people like Steve Bannon basically being forced to be ostracized from the Trump administration, regardless of what you think of him. Led to actual, real political changes and attacks. Between that and Russiagate, it became the primary attacks on Trump for his first term. So much so that the then president of the United States, the future president, Joe Biden, used it as his reason for running. Is there any one of these stories of extremism, hate, corruption, etc., etc.? Is there even one anymore that isn't tied to somehow the establishment or the Democratic Party creating the entire hoax? Is there even one? So I wait with bated breath while cheering to see if there's any actual consequences from this. But make no mistake, it's a huge story. And what it shows is another one of the building blocks of the narrative against Trump and Trump supporters is a fucking lie. You see, the Democratic Party is who they've always been. the party that's funding the Ku Klux Klan. You want to stop the funding of white supremacist hate groups? Stop funding the Democrats.